Story 1. The Island That Wasn't on the Map. I didn't believe in cursed places before I went to that island. I grew up in Washington State, near the coast, and islands were normal to me. Weekend ferries, kayaking trips, lighthouse tours. Nothing about water or land surrounded by it ever scared me. If anything, I trusted islands more than cities. They felt quiet, honest, predictable. That was my first mistake. In the summer of 2014, I was working seasonal construction jobs, anything that paid well and didn't ask too many questions. That's how I met Daniel Crow. He was older than me, mid-40s maybe, sunburned skin, eyes that never seemed to fully focus on you. He told me he owned a small piece of land off the Pacific Northwest coast, an island. Not a tourist island, not on any brochure, just land. He said he needed help repairing an old cabin there. 3 days of work, cash payment, no paperwork. That should have been my second mistake. He showed me the location on a printed nautical chart, not Google Maps. I remember that detail clearly. When I tried to look it up on my phone later, the island didn't appear, just open water. I asked him about it. "Old charts," he said. "Some things don't get updated." That answer didn't sit right, but money has a way of smoothing out doubt. We left before sunrise in a small motorboat from a private dock. No marina, no paperwork, just us, the engine, and a gray, unmoving ocean. The further we went, the quieter the world became. No birds, no distant boats. Even the wind seemed to fade. After almost 2 hours, the island appeared. At first, it looked wrong. Not dramatic, just off. The shoreline was jagged, uneven in a way that felt unnatural, like it had been torn rather than shaped by waves. The trees were tall but thin, crowded together too tightly, their branches tangled like knotted fingers. As we got closer, I noticed something else. No beaches, just rock. Sharp, dark stone rising straight from the water. Daniel didn't speak as we docked. He tied the boat quickly, nervously, like someone afraid to linger. The dock itself looked old, rotted planks, rusted nails, warped wood that groaned under our weight. "Cabins inland," he said. "We'll work fast." The path into the forest was narrow, barely visible, like it hadn't been used in years. As soon as we stepped under the trees, the temperature dropped. Not by a little. It felt like stepping into a shadow that swallowed heat. I remember checking my watch. It was just past 9 a.m. The light said morning. The forest said night. No insects, no birds, no wind. The silence was so complete it pressed against my ears. Every footstep sounded too loud, like we were being warned to stay quiet. After about 15 minutes, we reached the cabin. It wasn't what I expected. It was bigger, older, built from thick logs, blackened with age, as if it had survived multiple fires, or something worse. The windows were covered from the inside with wooden boards. The door was metal, not wood, metal. That alone should have made me leave. Daniel unlocked it slowly, hesitating before turning the key, like he was bracing himself. When the door opened, the smell hit me. Not rot, not mold, something metallic, bitter, like old blood soaked into wood and never cleaned. Inside, the cabin was bare. No furniture, no decorations, just a single room with a trap door in the floor and heavy chains bolted into the walls. I stared at them. "What happened here?" I asked. Daniel didn't answer right away. "People used to come out here," he finally said, Back in the 70s, off-grid types, some didn't leave. That was his entire explanation. We worked in silence for hours, patching cracks, replacing boards, reinforcing the door. The entire time, I felt watched. Not in a dramatic way, more like awareness, like something knew exactly where I was at all times. Around noon, I noticed something disturbing. My watch still read 9:12 a.m. I tapped it, checked my phone. No signal. The battery had drained from full to 18%. "Daniel," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "how long have we been here?" He looked at me, eyes wide. "Too long." That's when we heard it. Footsteps. Not ours. Slow, deliberate, circling the cabin. I moved toward the door, but Daniel grabbed my arm. "Don't," he whispered. "If you acknowledge them, they get closer." Them. The footsteps stopped directly outside the door. Then came the knocking. Not loud, not aggressive, polite. 3 soft taps. I don't scare easily, but in that moment, my body reacted before my mind did. My hands started shaking, my breathing became shallow. Every instinct screamed that whatever was on the other side was not human. The knocking moved, to the walls, to the windows, all around us at once. Then the voice started. It sounded like a man trying very hard to sound normal. "Hello?" it said. "Boat broke down. Need help." Daniel shook his head violently. "Don't answer," he mouthed. The voice changed. It dropped the act. "What time is it?" it asked. The chains on the walls began to rattle. The trapdoor in the floor vibrated as if something underneath was pushing upward. That's when Daniel finally told me the truth. This island, he said, didn't exist the way normal places do. It appeared and disappeared. People found it by accident. Fishermen, smugglers, explorers. Those who stayed too long couldn't leave. The island didn't kill you. It kept you. The things outside weren't visitors. They were former guests. People who had asked the wrong questions, who had checked their watches, who had realized time didn't move forward here. But knocking turned into scratching. Fingernails, or something like them, dragged across metal. "We have to go," I whispered. Daniel nodded. "But it only lets you leave if it thinks you don't know." We waited. No speaking, no movement. I forced my eyes away from the door, ignored the sounds, ignored the feeling of being studied. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Eventually, the sounds faded. When we stepped outside, the forest looked different, closer. The trees leaned inward. The path back to the dock was narrower than before. We ran. I don't remember reaching the boat. I remember the engine refusing to start. I remember the water rippling in strange circular patterns. I remember something standing at the edge of the trees, watching us, not moving, not blinking. Then the engine roared to life. The island began to recede unnaturally fast, like it was being pulled away. When we finally reached open water, my phone buzzed. Full battery, signal restored. The date had changed. 3 days had passed. Daniel never spoke to me again. He disappeared a year later. No records, no obituary. Sometimes when I check old nautical charts online, I see it, a small, unnamed shape in the water. Then I refresh the page, and it's gone. And every now and then, in the middle of the night, my phone lights up with a notification from an unknown number. No message, just the time. Always 9:12 a.m. Story 2. They still live on North Brother Island. I never planned to sneak onto North Brother Island. I didn't even know it existed until my roommate brought it up one night, scrolling through obscure urban exploration forums at 2 in the morning. He showed me grainy photos, abandoned hospital buildings swallowed by vines, shattered windows staring out over the East River, long hallways filled with shadows. The place looked unreal, like something that had been erased on purpose. North Brother Island sits between the Bronx and Rikers Island. Thousands of people pass it every day without noticing it. No ferries, no tours, no signs, just a dark shape in the water that most New Yorkers subconsciously avoid looking at too closely. The island used to house Riverside Hospital, a quarantine facility. Smallpox, tuberculosis, typhoid. People were sent there and forgotten. Some died alone. Some tried to escape by swimming and drowned. Officially, the island is uninhabited. Unofficially, no one who's been there agrees on that. We went at night. There were 4 of us, me, my roommate Eric, a guy named Nolan who owned a small inflatable boat, and his girlfriend Kara, who brought a camera and way too much confidence. We told ourselves we'd be careful, we'd be quiet, we'd be in and out. That lie lasted about 10 minutes. As we crossed the water, the city lights faded behind us. The island grew larger, darker, more detailed. Trees clustered together like they were hiding something. The ruined hospital buildings rose behind them, crooked and uneven, like broken teeth. When we landed, the first thing I noticed was the smell. Not decay, not mildew. Disinfectant. Sharp, chemical, clean in a way that didn't belong in a place abandoned for decades. Kara laughed nervously and said maybe the city still treated the grounds, but no one responded. The dock was partially collapsed, and the moment we stepped onto the island, my phone lost signal. Not surprising, but my battery dropped from 92% to 40% in seconds. Eric pointed it out. We all checked. Same thing. That's when I started recording audio on my phone. I don't know why. Instinct, maybe. Like some part of me already knew we'd need proof. The forest swallowed us quickly. The city noise vanished. No sirens, no traffic, just our footsteps and the distant sound of water hitting rocks. We reached the first building, a long, narrow structure with shattered windows and faded warning signs still bolted to the walls. Quarantine zone. Authorized personnel only. The door was already open. Inside, the air felt wrong, heavy, pressurized. Every sound echoed too much, like the building was listening. Rows of empty beds lined the hall, rusted frames, torn straps. These were for restraints, Nolan whispered. No one joked after that. As we moved deeper, I started to notice something unsettling. The dust on the floor was disturbed. Not footprints exactly, more like drag marks, long, uneven streaks leading from room to room. Something had been moving here, recently. Kara raised her camera and snapped a photo. The flash lit up the hallway for a split second, and in that instant I saw figures at the far end, standing perfectly still. When the light faded, they were gone. I told myself it was a trick of shadows. Old buildings do that. Your brain fills in gaps. That explanation worked until Eric grabbed my arm. "Do you hear that?" I listened. Breathing. Not ours. Too many. It was coming from the walls, low, wet, labored, like dozens of people struggling to inhale at the same time. We backed toward the exit, but the door we had entered through was gone. Not closed, gone. Just a solid wall where it used to be. That's when the lights came on. Dim, yellow, flickering to life one by one down the hallway. Kara screamed. The beds began to move. Not sliding, not rolling. They were being pulled.
Straps tightened, metal frames scraped across the floor toward the center of the hall, forming neat rows like the building was preparing for patients. A voice echoed from the far end. "Remain calm," it said. It sounded old, tired, automated. "Quarantine procedures are now in effect." The breathing grew louder. Figures emerged from the side rooms. They wore hospital gowns, some of them stained dark, others hung loosely on bodies that were too thin, too wrong. Their skin was gray, stretched tight over bone. Their eyes, God, their eyes were cloudy, unfocused, but somehow aware. They weren't walking, they were drifting, floating inches above the floor. One of them turned its head toward me and spoke in a voice that didn't belong to a living thing. "What are your symptoms?" We ran. The hallway stretched impossibly long, doors appearing where there hadn't been any before. Every turn led to another ward, another room, another echo of suffering. Nolan tripped. When I turned back, something had wrapped around his ankle, long fingers, too many joints. He screamed as he was dragged into a room, the door slamming shut behind him. We didn't stop. I still hate myself for that. The building began to change. Walls peeled, paint bubbled and cracked, revealing old bloodstains beneath. Names were carved on the walls. Dates. "Please, let me out. I'm better now. They won't let me leave." Eric started coughing, at first lightly, then violently. He doubled over, gasping, clutching his chest. "I can't breathe," he wheezed. Kara tried to help him, but hands reached out from the walls, dozens of them, grabbing at her arms, her hair, pulling her away. She screamed my name. I never saw her again. I dragged Eric forward, half carrying him, until we burst out into open air. The forest, the dock, the boat. We shoved off as fast as we could. As the island pulled away, I looked back. Lights were on in every building. Figures stood at the shoreline, watching, waiting. Eric collapsed as soon as we reached shore. He died in the ambulance. The doctor said it was acute respiratory failure. No infection, no explanation. The official report said he'd had an undiagnosed condition. They never asked why his lungs looked scarred, burned, like he'd been breathing poison for years. When I went to the police, they told me Nolan and Kara had no records, no social media, no missing persons reports. It was like they never existed. Sometimes when I'm near the river at night, I hear coughing carried on the wind. And once, just once, I saw lights flicker across the water. North Brother Island doesn't need visitors anymore. It already has patients, and it's still quarantined.
Story 3. The Last Ferry to San Servolo. The ferry wasn't supposed to exist. At least, that's what the Coast Guard report said later. No registration number, no listed route, no company name, just a single line typed in the incident summary. Vessel could not be identified. But I remember it clearly because I was on it. I was 27, fresh out of a bad breakup and desperate to disappear for a while. I'd taken a solo trip that summer, bouncing between coastal towns and islands, the kind of places where time feels slower and strangers don't ask questions. That's how I ended up in a small harbor town just before midnight, sitting on a bench with a backpack at my feet, wondering why none of the hotels had vacancies. That's when I saw the ferry. It slid into the dock without a sound, no horn, no announcement, just water parting gently as the hull touched wood. The boat was old, not rusted, preserved. White paint yellowed with age, wooden railings worn smooth by decades of hands. A single sign above the entrance read San Servolo, Final Crossing. I'd never heard of San Servolo. I assumed it was a private island,
maybe a retreat, maybe a town I'd missed on the map. A man in a dark coat stood at the top of the ramp. His face was pale, his expression neutral in a way that felt rehearsed. "Last trip?" he said calmly. "You coming or not?" "How long is the ride?" He smiled, but only with his mouth. "Long enough." That should have been my warning. I boarded. There were already passengers inside, about 12. They sat silently, spaced evenly apart on wooden benches. No one spoke, no one looked at their phones. Some stared straight ahead, others looked down at their hands like they were afraid of what might happen if they lifted their eyes. I took a seat near the back. As the ferry pulled away, I noticed something unsettling. The shoreline behind us didn't get smaller. It just faded, like a bad memory being pushed aside. The water around us was impossibly still. No waves, no reflection of stars, just blackness stretching in every direction. Minutes passed, or hours. Time felt unreliable, like my brain couldn't agree on how fast it was moving. Eventually, I tried to make conversation. "First time?" I asked the woman across from me. She looked up slowly. Her eyes were bloodshot, exhausted. "No," she said, "that's the problem." Before I could ask what she meant, the lights flickered. A low hum filled the cabin, vibrating through the floorboards and into my chest. It wasn't coming from the engine. It felt deeper, older, like the sound of something massive turning beneath us. A voice crackled over the intercom. "Passengers," it said, distorted and uneven, "please remain seated. Arrival is approaching." Something about the pause unsettled me. I stood up. The man in the dark coat appeared beside me instantly. I hadn't heard him move. "Sit," he said quietly. "What island is this really?" I asked. His eyes finally met mine. "It's not an island," he replied. "It's a conclusion." The ferry slowed. Out of the darkness, land emerged, San Servolo. It was wrong in a way that's hard to explain. The shoreline curved inward too sharply, like it was folding in on itself. Buildings stood close together, their windows dark, their shapes uneven, as if they'd been built from memory rather than design. No lights, no movement, just waiting. As we docked, several passengers stood automatically, like they'd done this before. Their movements were tired, resigned. The woman across from me whispered, "Don't get off." "Why?" I asked. "Because you don't arrive. You're processed." The ramp lowered. The man in the coat gestured toward the exit. "End of the line?" Two passengers hesitated. They were a couple, young, maybe early 20s. The girl was crying quietly. The boy looked angry, defiant. "This is messed up," he said loudly. "We're not going." The man sighed. "That's unfortunate." The lights went out. When they came back on, the couple was gone. No sound, no struggle, just empty space where they'd been standing. Panic rippled through the remaining passengers, but it was muted, controlled, like everyone knew screaming wouldn't help. I backed away slowly. "I didn't buy a ticket. I didn't agree to this." He tilted his head. "You board it," he replied. "That's agreement enough." As passengers disembarked, I noticed something horrifying. They weren't walking onto the island. They were changing as they stepped onto the dock. Their postures straightened, their expressions emptied, their skin paled further, losing warmth, losing life. By the time they reached the end of the ramp, they looked like residents, like they belonged. I ran. I don't remember making the decision. My body just moved. I bolted toward the front of the ferry, toward the wheelhouse. The door was locked, but weak. I smashed it open with my shoulder and stumbled inside. The controls were ancient. No GPS, no radio, but there was a logbook. I flipped through it desperately. Names filled the pages, dates going back decades, notes written in different handwritings. Third crossing, still not accepted. They say I'm not ready. I don't remember who I was before. I turned the last page. My name was written there, in my handwriting, dated 5 years earlier. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. The man stood in the doorway. "You always try this part," he said gently. "You never succeed." "What is this place? What do you do to people?" He considered the question. San Servolo is where unresolved lives go. People who were meant to end but didn't. Accidents avoided. Deaths delayed. Choices interrupted. "That's insane!" "Is it?" he asked. "You survived a car crash when you were 22. Head-on collision. Doctors said you shouldn't have lived." My blood ran cold. "You weren't supposed to," he continued. "This ferry has been correcting that mistake ever since." Memories flooded back, dreams of water, of docks, of endless nights that felt familiar in the worst way. "You've been here before," he said. "Every time you resist, every time you forget." I looked out the window. The island felt closer now, pulling. "What happens if I stay?" I asked. "You dissolve," he said simply, "into the island, into the others. And if I don't?" He smiled sadly. "You'll come back." The floor lurched. I made a decision. I grabbed the logbook and threw it into the water. The ferry screamed. Not metaphorically, it screamed, metal warping, wood splintering, a sound like something alive being wounded. The man staggered back. "What did you do?" he shouted. The island began to recede, not fade, but retreat, like it was being dragged away against its will. The ferry surged forward violently. I blacked out. I woke up on the shore. Morning light, sirens, paramedics. They told me I'd been found floating near the harbor, clinging to debris from a boat that didn't exist on any record. They said I was lucky, that I'd survived. But sometimes late at night, I hear water outside my window, and a horn, low, distant, calling. And I know, somewhere out there, the ferry is still running, waiting for me to finish the crossing.